Welcome to Facebook Live, and welcome most importantly to our big conversation. My name's Deborah Lee, I'm the Chief Executive of Gloucestershire Hospitals. I hope that most of you know that. If not, I have not been doing a great job. I'm joined by some colleagues this morning. I'm being joined by Coral Boston, who very recently took up the post of lead in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion, but particularly with a focus on the experience of our BAME colleagues, and also Noel Peter. Noel is a trauma surgeon who works in the Trust, and I think very bravely, Noel doesn't have a formal title or a job, but he's put his head above the parapet and is somebody that in my eyes wants to make a positive difference in this space. So I'm really grateful for that, Noel. And also David Weaver. David's joined us because he's part of DWC, a consulting group who works in partnership with Trust to help them better understand this whole agenda around inclusion. And so again, welcome, David.
Thank you very much and good afternoon all, and I'm really pleased to be here. Most of you, if not all of you, will know some of the work that we're doing, and really this is about engaging big conversations with the organisation where people can be honest, open and frank about issues relating to equalities, some emphasis on race equality for reasons that will come out in this conversation. And so conversations that inform action, that's the really important piece that people have been saying to us whilst we've been going around the organisation, myself and my team, over the last few weeks. So conversations need to lead to action. And I'm going to engage a conversation with the people in this room and then hopefully out to yourselves, and let's have a real good dialogue. Be open, be frank, be honest. You've all been so far, and then we'll see what's possible in terms of actions that make a difference. So I want to start with you, Deborah, because conversations matter. They're a powerful way to get agreement. Treaties between government are caused by conversations and so forth. So it's important that we get action. How do you hope to achieve that, Deborah?
I think what feels really important to me, sometimes there's a moment in time, isn't there? And you don't always know that you're history making when you're doing something. It's only the future that tells you you made history. But you can't get away from this kind of what almost feels like a perfect storm at the moment, that I think could be a platform for a degree of success that we've struggled to achieve in the past. And that perfect storm is, of course, the very tragic murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and what followed on from that, but also what we now understand to be a disproportionate impact on BAME colleagues in relation to COVID and the pandemic. So there's this, let's more positively, not a perfect storm, there's this collision of planets that I think gives us almost a once in a lifetime opportunity to really make a difference. And I liked your introduction, because colleagues have said to me, we're not interested in action plans, we just want action, Deborah, this time. You know, every year we produce our RARES action plan, don't we? And it has all the things in it that you'd expect to see. But for whatever reason, and this, David, is partly why we've invited you in to join us, is for whatever reason, despite our best efforts, and I think those efforts have got better and better over time, but despite those best efforts, my colleagues that are not white and privileged do not have as good an experience of working here as I do. And that's not just my BAME colleagues. Our data says that if you're disabled, you're probably going to report a less good experience. If you are not heterosexual, you probably have a less good experience. So for me, this is a conversation. The big conversation is about our BAME colleagues, but moreover, for me, it's about inclusion. How do we develop a culture where we're truly inclusive? Because if we get the culture right for me, then you can bet your bottom dollar we'll be getting it right for others. Because whatever is at play for the likes of me, it will be aggravated and worse for those that don't look like me. That's the evidence. It's unequivocal.
That's a really good point, because what's coming up is that not everybody's having a bad experience, and so let's put it into perspective. Yeah. There are pockets of the organisation where people are saying some good stuff's happening and things have moved, but it is of concern that what we're picking up are a significant amount of people that are saying that they feel that if they were white, but for the fact that they are Black, Asian, minority ethnic, the situation would be different. Deborah, just one thing on that, because I suppose I've been saying to people that we feel confident that the organisation is saying, speak up and be honest about it. Could you just add to that before I move on? Just to say, You know,
Yeah, and
how safe could people feel around
yeah.
this?
And I think that's a really, I mean, it's almost the elephant in the room. So, thank you for putting it on the table, because I do think this is really important because, Noel, you spoke at our trust board recently. And one of the things that Noel said was a lot of people, a lot of colleagues, BAME colleagues in particular, told me not to do this because there'd be some kind of potential retribution or backlash. So this isn't just a theory, this is how people feel. And sadly, a small number of people could point to an example of where speaking out didn't do them any favours. I can say what you'd expect to say, David. Can't I can say it, but I think for me, it's about us all kind of living that and walking in the shoes of others that don't feel that. So we've got the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. We've got a whole raft of routes, and again, we've done more this year to develop guardians. So to the point that Coral sometimes says, I spent my career looking up at people that didn't look like me, and that didn't help me to aspire, but it didn't make it easy either to talk to people above me. Is developing guardians that come from all sorts of backgrounds with all sorts of, we call it protected characteristics, don't we? So I can just restate my commitment to whatever people say in this space, that it is a safe space. But David, I know that you've said, if somebody doesn't want to be part of the big conversation, if they want to be part of a very small conversation with just you, that you will offer that and you will absolutely assure them anonymity. And you've heard me say, I won't press you for anybody's, rank, name, number. We will take at face value the experience they've described to you. No investigation, no checking, that what you tell us is will become my lived truth.
What's going to be really important is that people know that a difference has been made. I'm going to ask that of Coral as well, and yourself again, Deborah, at the end. How will you know that a difference has been made? Because there has to be some change now. But Noel, Deborah's already mentioned that you've got an axe to grind. You've got not a job title that says this. You play a very important role in the NHS in terms of being a clinician consultant in trauma. Trauma is going to be an extra important piece, aftermath of COVID-19. But why are you here? What's important for you as a person of color in the organization?
Thank you, David. And thank you, Deborah. I guess in a sense, let me just first say that I think, our organization, Progressive, it is trying to address the, issues that exist. And as I said before, I don't think this is an issue that is isolated in our organization. I think it's widespread in our country. And I think the thing that probably has driven me more than anything else is that COVID has had a very odd effect around the world, where if inequity exists, it's just amplified its presence. And so we know that 97% of doctors who died during this pandemic were of a BAME origin. We know that more than 70% of nursing staff, healthcare assistants, allied health professions, again, were of a BAME origin. I lost a dear friend because of COVID. And it resonated with me that there were inequities that existed in our system, that the system itself failed to address those inequities. And unless we all come together to address these issues, it will prevail. In essence, when I look at this organization, I see such huge potential, and I know that there's more we can offer. But we only achieve our full potential if we all are there to allow it to grow. So if it comes to regards to inequity exists, as we all know, in all forms, not just in race, but again, sexual orientation, gender. We know that is present in our society, and I think the NHS is a reflection of our society. And if we can't get it right here, we can't get it right in wider society. So we all have this massive responsibility to try to get it right.
I'm going to really push this before going out and encouraging conversations, because notwithstanding all of that, and I agree with that, we work with a lot of organizations and they're saying it's happening in other organizations, which is it is the case. When you speak about some of the experiences of Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff, all around. But in this organization, some people are saying that they feel they're bullied more. They feel that that they're harassed sometimes, that there's a culture where they're on the wrong end of grievances and discipline. We're still looking at the statistics on that, by the way, but these are some of the things that are coming out, and that much of this was there before COVID-19 and the death of George Floyd. So Coral, just in terms of your role, I wonder what you've been picking up, whether these points have been coming up for you as well. And then, there are people in the audience that might want to put comments through and make suggestions, etc. So Coral, what's your thought on this?
Thanks, David. Yeah, absolutely right. These are the concerns and issues that have been around long before COVID. But COVID has helped to magnify, has helped us to see with a clear lens that it's still happening now. And I think our colleagues in the organisation, some of them are feeling that they are now able to share and demonstrate what's been going on in their lives, those negative experiences that they've felt when they come to work on a day-to-day basis. In our organisation, it's highlighted that bullying and harassment is, our BAME colleagues feel that they are bullied and harassed more than non-BAME colleagues. I've had, since my role started in July, I've had numerous emails, I've had anonymous calls that staff have felt that they are going through this harassment and this bullying, and they have that less experience. And this is why it's important that we can build trust, because some of them can come and identify themselves to me, but some of them can't. And that makes me think we've got a huge percentage of our colleagues that are suffering in silence, and they don't feel that they can trust anyone. They don't feel confident to voice their concerns. And this is why it's important that we can have this conversation, that we can have right guardians and we can have allies that these people can go to, because unless we open the door to change, it will never change. Change will be as it is now. But COVID has helped, and bringing in your team, David, Deborah has agreed to bring your team in to help this change, but we can't make the change unless we have these conversations. And staff will experience this unhealthy environment that they work in on a day-to-day basis. And we've got to change that. We have to change the status quo. We've lived in this status quo for a long time. We've become comfortable with the status quo. And that's what I found that our BAME colleagues, that's what we've done, because we think, well, that's how it is. But it isn't. It isn't. So we need to make a change.
What we found as part of this conversation is that, so Deborah, you made the point that, there's disabled colleagues, there's LGBTQ colleagues, and other people who are not Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, or people of color that are saying there are particular issues for us too, but also we feel that we want to be supporting or raising issues or questions or solutions about how we can be allies in supporting this particular issue. The issue of race has been a big one because, we all know it's not denied the George Floyd piece, and that, you can't watch TV at any point and not see this happening. And on our screens, like you say, the NHS, I come from an NHS family, and you see that disparity that there's been. So, there is something about, we really need to deal with it in this moment. Some questions are beginning to come in, actually. And one of those I want to come to at the end, which is around how do the trust deal with discrimination and racism towards NHS staff, from other staff and from patients going forward. I'll come back to that in a while. But there are some questions about people that are experiencing the racism. And there's a question of you, Noel, which is around, have you faced racism or discrimination in your career? And how have you tried to address those experiences? So maybe this is in a nutshell, just give us a sense of that.
Thank you, David. I, of course, have faced racism and discrimination throughout my career, and I was very candid about it when I spoke to the board. And let me just say, when you experience racism or discrimination, it's really difficult because on the whole, it's a very, as you can imagine, emotive subject for all of us. Most of us don't really want to talk about it because when you do talk about it, it almost makes it real. It almost makes it like, someone's judged you, not on the weight of your character, but they've judged you on the color of your skin or because of the way you sound. They judge you on bits of your character that you can't change. And, every moment in my life when I think about it, elements of discrimination or racism that I've faced, the hardest bit has not been the words of those uttered by that person against you. It's always been, I can still remember moments where you look at others, your friends or others around there, people that you don't know, but they were present at that moment. And I think Martin Luther King said it best. He said, in the end, you don't remember the words of your enemies, but the silence of your friends. And I remember that. I remember those moments where you thought somebody would speak up and someone would say, that's not right, and so on. And I think the biggest thing for me, when one faces it in your career, I think the first thing you got to say to yourself is, look, it's not first that it's unreal and it's not about you. That's the first thing that we all do. We think it's about us. We think that the problem is with us. And the problem isn't with you. I'm here to say to all of you that what you feel is valid and that this does exist. And, people may call it whatever they call it. They may say to you, it's just your perception, your feelings, you're too sensitive, and I'm afraid that's not true. The truth is that how you feel about how others treat you, and particularly if you feel they're discriminating you because of the way you look and because of the way you sound, that's wrong. That's never right. And it's to have the courage to speak up, because I feel the failure to speak up makes us complicit. And, far too many times in my career, I've been silent. It's taken me a long time to find my voice. I'm slightly ashamed to say that in my 40s is when I found my voice. I was always fearful that if I spoke up, that somehow the good in me, the fact that I was in a good career or I was doing well, that would all be taken away from me. That I did not want to rock the boat because I was afraid that those around me had far greater power over my life than I really did. And that's not true. The truth is, you are a lot stronger than you may think. And I advocate anyone to speak up. And sometimes they are uncomfortable conversations, but we need to have it. Because if we don't have it, we won't go any further than where we are now.
So, you and I talked about this. One of the things that you said that struck me, and correlates to your point about allyship, is what can non-BAME colleagues do that can be most powerful in this space, and it is calling it out. A white colleague calling out another white colleague in relation to discrimination, racism, however you want to frame it, you said it's so much more powerful than if you like a BAME colleague coming to your defence, because that all just speaks to we're in separate camps, we're different people, so again back to this the power of allyship. It's if you see it, then name it and call it out, whatever it is. Whether it's behaviours towards a disabled colleague or even a white on white, is to name it. And that you remember you saying to me that is the most powerful support that you could get from an ally, without a doubt.
Agree.
The question here is about how often are staff experiencing discrimination at work. I don't know if you want to touch on that. We've been looking at some data in terms of people formally stating that they're experiencing discrimination or racism at work, but sometimes it's not always about the data. So do you want to comment on that?
So I'd like to say two things in that space, David. So firstly is if one of the things that shocked me and shocked the board when we revisited this, because bear in mind we'd had a good look at this with Yvonne Coghill a couple of years ago, but when we revisited it and we really studied it, what really shocked us all was not only do BAME colleagues have a good, less good experience of working in the NHS. That's a given. That's irrefutable. We've got an institutionally racist NHS. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but the evidence is unequivocal. But what we discovered was that the experience of that in Gloucestershire is even less good than that national disparity. So there's something else going on about Gloucestershire. And there are lots of theories and, you know, hypotheses. But again, I know that you're really committed trying to understand, well, what is it about Gloucestershire? Because it's bad enough that gap exists, you know, nationally, but for it to be a greater gap in Gloucestershire, you know, I for one really want to understand. And the second point I want to make is a lot of colleagues, white colleagues in particular, say to me this whole thing about perception. The problem is, Deborah, when something doesn't go right in the life of a BAME colleague, and they say this with a generous heart and with a positive spirit, then they're more likely to think it's about the colour of their skin than a lot of other things that could contribute. And the thing about that I really just want to knock on the head is, so let's put aside, you know, the speech is about everyone's feelings legitimate and perception is what it is. What I want to go back to is, okay, so you're a bit of a skeptic, so put that aside and go over there and be skeptical. But look at the data that's unequivocal, yeah, that isn't about feelings or perception. Look at the data about failure to progress, you know, in careers. Look at something as basic as access to discretionary training. So what our own data and what the data nationally shows you is, put aside the perception and feelings, which you could argue someone's, you know, description of I was discriminated against it is a perception, it is a feeling, but go to the stuff that's not about feelings if you need to. Disappointed you might, but if you need to, look at the data that's unequivocal, yeah? And our BAME colleagues, our disabled colleagues, you know, do less well, they fare less well than somebody like myself. So that's the point for me is to hang on to, is let's quit all this chat about, you know, whether the perception's valid or whatever. Is if you're worried about that, just go to the data. Let's stop discussing whether we've got a problem and start talking about how we're going to deal with it.
And one of the things that you've said to us very clearly in the board, and which is the reason I want to get involved, is that there's got to be action. There's got to be some recommendations about how does it change? Because it's not rocket science. There's some things that we can do that can make a difference. And actually a lot of that will come from, you know, people in this audience and staff just engage, because you work in the organization, you know it. You know, you've got consultants like us coming in with all these concepts and frameworks. They're good ones, most of them, but actually you know the detail of it. But the other bit of it is that the reasons why we're doing this as well, it's not just for the staff, it's for the patients as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the questions here is that if something around this is impacting on patients, that if there's discrimination against some staff based on their protected characteristic, that there's evidence that that could be the case for patients. So Noel, do you want to just touch on that? Because this is about the business case for, you know, the health of the nation and all people, and also I think minority patients. Do you want to touch on that as a clinician?
I mean, look, the data is, as we know, is shocking. That we know that we know outcomes. Whether if you look at maternity outcomes, if you look at the outcomes from COVID, if you look at the outcomes for disability patients, that, you know, being of a Black, Asian, ethnic minority means you get a worse outcome, and the outcomes is horrendous. But let's go back to this fact of the fact that if you are a clinician on a day-to-day basis, if you feel that you are being oppressed or you feel discriminated against and so on and so forth, I can tell you this, that it's probably one of the most horrible feelings ever on the planet when you come to work and you feel that it's not a place of safety. If you actually think that you're coming to a place where you're not sure that the support network around you is really going to support you, that they're out, if you like, to get you, it is so difficult to give the best of you to care for that person in front of you. Of course it is. We know that bullying, we know that, you know, negative behavior against each other causes a drop in performance, and a massive drop in performance. We know that it impairs decision-making. We know that it fails to allow the healthcare system to deliver the best care for that person in front of us. So you're absolutely right that, you know, a lot of what we're trying to do here is inadvertently trying to ensure that we, as an organization, and because we are a high-risk organization, because we deal with sick people coming in day to day, and we have to make quick decisions and effective decisions, we have to make sure that we all are working to the best of our potential so that our patients get the best care. And particularly from my point of view is that, For me, having someone like Deborah at the helm and Coral and so on, it's great because they recognize that, these are issues that we need to sort of engage with, because ultimately we're here for the people of Gloucestershire, and this is a public sector organization, and we must never forget that everything that we do is for the community around us. And so we need to be at the best of our abilities. And so discrimination has to be eradicated. It has to be. It's how we go about it that's difficult, because we can't do it on our own. We have to do it together. It's not me against racism. It's not you against racism. It's us.
Really, really powerful points. And again, it just comes back to why this is really, really important, where we have to hear from you. And Coral, we had a conversation some time ago, well, last week actually, where you were saying that we really need to see more people getting involved in it. Do you want to just touch on that? We've got a few minutes left, and I want to go to Deborah about sort of next steps.
As I said earlier, your team of David have gone out and had conversations, but we need conversations with the right people in order to make the change. Just because I'm in this role, I can't make the change as quick as I'd like to. I've heard from some of you, I've heard from small groups about what they want, but we need more. We need more engagement from our BAME colleagues and also our disabled colleagues. But this big discussion is about the experience of our BAME colleagues. And
so people can make. I'm just conscious of time, but so people can make direct contact with you then to talk about this. Then
people can make direct contact with me. They're already doing that now, but also they can join in this big conversation.
And David, we've had lots of promotion about how to do that, so we'll put it out again in the Global, the link.
Yeah.
It's on many of our kind of WhatsApp networks, but again, not just targeting those that recognise themselves as disabled or who are BAME, but wanting everyone to. And that for me is a really key message: is you don't need to be BAME or disabled or LGBTQ to be part of this story. I can't, reiterate Noel's point more. This is not about us or them. It's about, it's all of us have to be in this space together if we're going to make the change.
I suppose, so we'll be looking at pieces around what is there a Gloucestershire factor, because Gloucestershire is not the same as Lambeth, it's not the same as areas of Bristol, it's not the same, it's unique. So we really want to hear. We've got to, if you're really that committed, which I know you are, you've got to engage in this, because we need to hear it. We need some credibility to the recommendations that we will give, which will be essentially your recommendations. That's why it's important. But Deborah, I suppose the last question is that, you're rightly preoccupied with COVID-19. I don't know how you do it, frankly. That's going to take center stage. What do you need in terms of help for you to still address this particular issue? Because it's got to be center stage as well. So what's going to be important for you as chief exec? Because it's a leadership thing, isn't it? You're seeing.
Yeah, it is. I guess for me, COVID is just a what, isn't it? It's just something that's happening. The how is what matters. So I think COVID's just a great platform, isn't it? So my approach to this, because of what we know about the inequalities that are not just what happens during COVID, but the legacy that COVID will lead. It just aggravates any existing inequality. For me, it's the how. It's how do we approach this, and that is, again, I come back to, it's about compassionate leadership in its broadest sense. Diversity is just a fact. Inclusion is choice. You've heard me say that many times. I can reel off stats at the yin yang about the fact we have a diverse organisation. We should embrace that. What's interesting is our organisation is much more diverse in the community that it serves. And I think that is part of maybe our tension. If you live in Gloucestershire, 4.5% of your neighbours will be BAME. If you come into our hospital, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of being treated by a BAME doctor. And I think that's something that we have got to understand more about, is that the context out of hospital is different to the context within. But I think, I come back to, we have to take action. And David, we're not waiting for your report to land on our laps next March or April. It's already clear from just some of the early insights from your conversations that some things have to change and can change, and actually can change quite quickly, because they're not about culture or perception or people's feelings. We have an approach to recruitment that needs to be more inclusive. Because of unconscious bias, we know that our process at the moment will be precluding colleagues from a BAME background from making the final stages of a recruitment process. So there's things we can do straight away that don't require us to wait for your recommendations. The other one, and this again is to the big conversation, not the very small one-on-one conversation, what thoroughly depresses me is people say to me, but we know who these people are. We know who is more likely to be exclusive than inclusive. Well, if we know that, we need to do something about that. But doing something about it starts with us understanding that. And I don't call this, telling tales or grassing people up. If you want to get on board with our compassionate approach to inclusive leadership, you've got an obligation and a duty to call it out.
Thank you very much. We've now come to the end of time. I want to thank all of you. There's been quite a few questions that have come in we've not been able to respond to. So I'll bring that into the big conversation piece.
Please.
And in terms of our recommendations and so forth. And Deborah's right.
And I'd love to see what they are, David, because we might not answer
them
this morning, but there'll be ways in which we can answer them. And maybe, Coral, we put it through the diversity WhatsApp or whatever. But again, I just want to make sure everyone there's no question that I'm afraid of that I won't answer, however uncomfortable or difficult it is. So don't feel that the fact we haven't had time to answer them all this morning is any kind of form of censorship or whatever. Is if you've asked a question, please let's make sure that those colleagues get an answer.
So thank all of you for coming along. It's really been good, not to seeing you, but knowing that you're here, and we'll be back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, Noel, Coral, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.